Hey there, MRA, my Real Africanists. This is Marie Ya Jouf, the Real Africanist, and I would like to welcome you to my channel. If you've been here before, thank you for coming back, and if this is your first time, I welcome you with open arms. So, happy Black History Month. This is day 15, so I don't want to forget that, right? And want to remind you also of the Can't Ban Black Challenge. And that challenge is in response to American lawmakers trying to ban African studies in school systems across America, right? So you can go to my blog at therealafricanist.com if you want to learn more about the Can't Ban Black Challenge that I started on February the 1st to commemorate Black History Month. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about a video that I put out maybe last week, and in which I was saying that African leaders are not responsible for everything that, or all the issues that African nations or countries are experiencing today, right? And so the reason why I said that was not because I don't believe that the African leaders should be held responsible for governing their countries in a proper manner, right? And I don't, it's not that I don't believe that some of the African leaders could do a better job at that. However, the reason why I said that in the context in which I said it was because sometimes I don't know if people of African descent or African people on the continent, or whether outside of the continent within the diaspora, I don't know if we really understand what happened to the African continent, what happened to African people, right? Not African bodies, as they say sometime in the world of academia, right? I'm talking about African people. We are people. We are more than just bodies, right? I don't know if we understand that African countries and African people have gone through over 400 years, right, of enslavement, right? And another 100-odd years of colonization, which was just really, in my opinion, a milder or another form of slavery, right? Unless you think about what happened in the Congo under King Leopold, then that was just another form of torture and slavery, okay? So I'm saying this to say, right, if you take the African story out of context, then of course you're going to blame the people who are in office right now for all of the challenges that your country, African countries, are facing. However, nothing happens out of the blue. This is part of a long trajectory of enslavement, again, like I said, and conquest, right? And colonization that created the social economic conditions that we find ourselves as African people in today, right? So I always say that African diaspora communities are the microcosm and Africa is the macrocosm. Basically, I'm saying that everything that Africa suffers on a larger scale, Black people or African diaspora communities suffer on a smaller scale, right? And that is exploitation, that is impoverished conditions, that is oftentimes insufficient leadership, and that also is the legacy of, again, enslavement and what you all call colonization in Africa, but I will call Jim Crow in America, right? So I was just thinking, do we really understand that Africa lost almost half of its population during the enslavement period. I mean, do you know that there were 3 slave trades that happened on the continent, right? There was the the trans-Saharan slave trade, there was the transatlantic slave trade, and there was the East African slave trade that some people say still, exists. Again, we lost millions and millions of people to all of these trades, right? And within these trades, some of our best people, and I don't want to use that term best loosely, right? But some of the most wisest and skillful people within that group of people were, taken out of the continent, right? We had men, women, and children that were killed at will, right? So now, not only was it a physical reckoning, it was a mental, psychological reckoning, right? Those things do not just disappear, right? The trauma that's associated with those type of systems, it does not just disappear. Actually, it is passed, I believe, through the throughout generations, right? Through this, what we call generational trauma, okay? And that's just the that's the physical part of it. But let's talk about the social economic impact, right? And how it was done. So, of course, African chiefs and leaders are the ones that have been historically blamed for selling people, African people, into slavery, right? Now, for me, that's still up to debate, right? Because I'm just not buying it. I believe that there were Africans that were complicit, right, in the slave trade, but not to the extent that these European and Western so-called experts on African history would have us to believe, right? Because from my studies, this seems to be very complicated, right? Most of these, a number of these leaders that were supposed to, or rulers that were supposed to have participated in these slave trades, right? I won't say they weren't African, but many of them were products of relationships that occurred between Europeans and Africans. So they were children and offsprings of African women that European men had raped, right? Or that Arab men had raped, right? And these children were converted into these religions. So whether it was Christianity or into Islam, right? And these were some of the rulers or the so-called Africans that participated in these slave trades, right? And like I say, it goes a little deeper than that, but it's mighty ironic to me that every time I come across some of these names that are mentioned, like Tiptu from I think that's East Africa, right, over in Tanzania, over from that area. Every time I run across these names and a few more others that were supposedly from Central Africa or from this East African region, even from the West African region, right? These are products, these are children of these relationships between Arabs and Africans, or between Europeans and Africans. Or if they are not products of these relationships, then these are children that were kidnapped or supposedly voluntarily given to these these invaders or these foreigners to take to these islands or to exile their children onto these islands, right? And take them to these different countries in Europe or, in the Mediterranean part of the world or the Northwest Asian part of the world, right? Take their children over there and exile them and put them on islands and things like that for years and indoctrinate them with these religions, with these Islamic and Christian religions, right? And then bring them back. And then these are the people, right, normally that are convincing these other African people to participate in this trade, or that are helping these foreigners from the outside to systematically enslave African people, right? Because most of these children, again, are products too of royal families or ruling families, because these children were born by women who were part of these ruling families in these African cultures. And most African cultures at that time were matrilineal or matriarchal, right? So the bloodline, rulership was through the woman's bloodline, right? So you have a lot of that's happening, right? And I've seen that, like I say, all over the continent throughout, my studies, right? I mean, there's no way that you can really prove this stuff, but according to the historical accounts, right? So, during these times of enslavement as well as colonialism, okay, there was a lot of investment made in certain countries or certain areas of the continent at the time, because from what I understand, before colonization, there was no countries, basically. These 55 countries didn't exist, but there were areas and kingdoms, that exist, right? Now, I may have that wrong, but I'm not sure. I will look into that a little bit more, right? But how the Europeans played that after enslavement and even during enslavement, and like I say, I don't really know what was supposed to have happened between those years from the end of so-called enslavement, when the British so-called end enslavement, and that's a joke within itself, and we'll talk about that another time, right? Because they supposed to had ended slavery in 1808 or something earlier in the 1800s, but we know just as late as 1860 something in the United States that the last slave ship came from Africa into the United States, right? And so you're going to tell me that within 50 years at the end of slavery, that these Europeans or Americans can just go back over there and get more slaves after all the destruction, death and destruction and instability that the slave trade caused the African continent, right? These African people were still just waiting over here to enslave and sell their people. I'm not buying that bull crap. Like I say, it's hard to prove because, Western voices and narratives and institutions control the narrative, right? Because they control the presses, they control the institutions that tell the story, right? So it's really challenging for the voices who are trying to push back on that, or the narratives that are trying to push back against that, to be taken seriously, right? Because they have a way of being able to discredit, African and African diaspora people who are trying to tell another side of the story, right? I'll talk about that too on another video, how they label our scholars Afrocentric, right? That's a term or a key word for this is not legitimate, right? It's basically it doesn't it's not real scholarship, basically. That's what I'm trying to say. But anyway, back to that. So like even during colonization, okay, so you had these people that come into the African continent, right? So after the continent has suffered over 400 years of slavery, maybe about 50 years or 75 years or something like that between enslavement and the onslaught of this second wave of slavery, what you all call colonization, right? These forces come in here, right, and take over the African continent, right? Armed forces, right? Through violence. The people that's always talking about nonviolence, right? So they come in with these superior weapons, right, and take over, invade these African countries. Some, like I say, some of these colonizers used direct rule, and some of them used indirect rule. So direct rule looks like it was when they set up shop within these countries, right, and ruled directly from the countries. And indirect rule was when the colonial government ruled from their home base, right, and had African leaders who they chose to rule, right. And again, from what I'm piecing together, can understand that the way they organized this were these different chiefs ruled, okay. They created these chiefdoms. So now I'm not even sure if chiefdoms were indigenous to African civilization, or was this all a European creation, right? So I'm telling you, this history has to be rewritten all over, because even if you look at the the indigenous population in America, you will see the same thing, right? You will see where the same strategy was implemented, right? And some writers want to say that even the Native American indigenous people were also participating in slavery when the Europeans came there, and that's why it was easy to be able to infiltrate these tribes or these ethnic groups, right, and be able to divide and conquer and steal their land. So they use the same story over and over and over again, right, about these different indigenous populations, okay. However, getting back to what I was talking about colonialism in Africa, right? So they would go in, they set up these different countries, right? Disregarding the political and cultural structure of these areas of these regions that were already in existence, right? And mind you that this continent is coming off of 400 years or more of enslavement. Because if you look at the trans-Saharan slave trade, that started way back in the 7th century, right? Yeah, around the 7th century. So that takes us way back, way past 400 years. Okay, and those trades I want to mention, those three trades seem to me to be inclusive of one another and not exclusive events, right? It's like a continuation one of the other. And they were intricately tied together in some shape, form, or fashion, okay? So anyway, I was saying they were these European powers, as well as these Arabs or Muslim powers. They go into these countries, right? They set up a shop. That was another thing that was used, okay? Religion. And we know that. And I don't know why we want to deny that, but that's the truth of the matter. We can spin it any way we want to, but that was the truth of the matter, okay? So they go in here and they, wherever, most of the time it's where they have settled the capital, right? And they invest heavily in certain areas of these countries that they set up, right? So not they don't invest heavily in all of the country. They invest heavily in certain areas of the country, right? Also creating other divisions between the African people that already exist, right? Sometimes, like I talked about on the last video I did, and you can go over there and take a look at it, they would invest, like I talked about Sudan, right? So they was ruling Sudan as if it was one state nation, but they was actually ruling it as two separate nations, which it is today. And that's why it's that way today, because this colonial government caused that, right? They were investing heavily in the Islamic or Muslim north, right? Investing heavily in infrastructure, in schools, and in mosque, and and all of this type of investment, and investing nothing in the indigenous African area, which was in the South, right? And so therefore creating other divisions, on top of divisions. And then also in the South, what they did, now this was in Sudan, is they broke that area up into these hundreds of chieftains, and they ruled, indirect rule there, and they ruled through the chiefs, right? And I'm quite sure creating hierarchies between the chiefs that were ruling. So this is more division, right? That is being caused. And this is what happened all over the continent. Like I say, you even see that in West Africa. And that's why sometimes you have like areas, I would say probably, I'm going to say Ghana or Nigeria. I'm just going to throw that out there, right? Where you have a predominantly, Muslim north, and then you have a predominantly Christian south, right? And so, like, again, the more and more I study this, the more and more I believe that they were in cahoots with one another, right? Because how do you have, say, a country like Senegal that's almost 100%, is 98% Muslim, but they French-speaking country, right? So you have all of these different nuances that really don't make sense. But now I'm finding out that a lot of times these colonial powers, they would invest in certain areas. Like, so if they would invest heavily in maybe the Islamic area for if it benefits them in some kind of way, whatever that way may be, that's what they do, right? Because the fight wasn't necessarily with the Africans. The fight was with these, in between these European countries and these different Arab fractions as well, right? Which still goes on today, right? And we seem to be the pawns, not the victims, but we seem to be caught in the middle of all this because we are not victims. I refuse to accept that, because we fought back and we continue to fight back to this day. And this is a form of pushing back, right? Telling the story from our ancestors' point of view. So this is what we have been dealing with for centuries, right? So even like I say, as far as the economics is concerned, so we know that the colonial powers were the ones that were benefiting economically from these colonial governments or these colonial setups, right? They were the ones that were benefiting. And so at the end of colonialism, when, they want to say they gave African people, their independence, well, I'm going to say at the end of the battle for independence, when these African countries started to become victorious, right? That when these colonial governments pulled out of these African countries, I know you don't believe that they left empty-handed, right? I'm quite sure they took money and took a lot of the wealth with them, if the wealth was there in the first place, right? I heard some narratives that, there was wealth left behind, and, the African leaders, they squandered the wealth and all of this kind of stuff. But look, the reason why I had mentioned earlier about African American communities, because this kind of stuff happened in our communities, right? When enslavement was over and African people kind of they moved up out of the South in large numbers, going to the North to build communities, right, and to put their families back together, try to put the pieces back together. You know, doing Reconstruction, it wasn't easy. But even when we were able to build these strong communities, then you have these Europeans in these northern countries, right? I mean, in the northern states, also in the southern states, that, you know, were jealous basically of the fact, or still intimidated by the fact, that African people were able to put their lives back together and build these strong economic communities and family orientated communities, right? And these business epicenters, right? They come in and they flood the communities, right? They burn up the communities. I mean, you know, they do all kind of stuff. They terrorize, and, you know, we had to deal with lynchings and hangings and just terrorist threats, all while we were living in why we live in the United States. Even to this day, you know, you still have the continuation of this police brutality, right, which stems from police forces that were created then, right, to terrorize black people. So, you know, when they talk about this you know, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and all that disingenuous bull crap, because they have these systems, these economic systems that directly benefited from the enslavement and colonization of black people and got filthy rich off the back of our people. You know, they continue to be able to control these systems, and then they talk down to black people and act like it's because black people are not being responsible. You know, if we have $2 trillion collective buying power in the United States together, and I'm gonna talk about that because it may be $2 trillion, but it's not aggregated, because we don't even consider ourselves as one black community anyway, and there's nowhere possible that that money could be aggregated to just build what we want to call this whole generational wealth, right? And like I say, that's for another video, because I really have something to say about that. But I was going to say, if we got 2 trillion, they got 222 trillion, right? And so ours is really just a drop in the bucket. And so that's the same thing that I'm saying about these African continents, right? When these people left, the colonial leaders left, believe me, they divested. They took a lot of their investments and things like that out of those countries, right? And they took a lot of the wealth. And even if there was wealth left, then you know how much it must take to run a country, you know? And so you, first of all, you got a workforce that is untrained, right? Because of oppression that happened during colonialism, right? So you have this workforce that is untrained. You have these only these certain areas that have been invested in, so that are modernized, you know, or are ready to integrate, you know, your people into, you know, we even look at like when Ghana gained its independence, the first thing that Kwame Nkrumah, President Nkrumah did, right, was set out on a development project, right, to develop his country. So even if you did have money left, that's the first thing that you're gonna have to do, is try to develop your country, right? And also, if you don't have no money coming in and all money going out, and believe me, I know that, I've been in that situation personally. You might have a little money, but if you come to a point where everything's going out and nothing's coming in, right, then you have to turn to the same systems that created, you know, the mess sometimes in the first place, okay? And so I think that's what happened in African society. And, you know, people keep on saying, well, it's been 60 years, it's been 50 years. That is no time compared to 500, 600 years of, you know, divestment and 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 enslavement and colonialism. How are you going to turn something around in 60 years that's been going on for 500 years, right? And even with that, I never see you rarely ever see Africans giving their leaders credit for the things that they have been able to accomplish despite the odds and despite the division that was created among the different ethnic groups and things like that. And like I said, um and a lot of these systems, again, like I say, when a lot of these colonial leaders and foreign leaders and invaders pulled out, right, they left all of this, what they have created, all of this division and all of this burden on the shoulders of African rulers to try to figure out. And they still, I'm quite sure, trying to figure out to this day, because like I was saying, in Sudan, they weren't willing to, those who were leading the pack, the Arabs as well, the Arabs in the north as well as the Africans in the south, they weren't ready to give up their positions, the positions that they occupied for decades, while these colonial powers were in place or had their back. That's just like a lot of times I think I compare it to relationships, how sometimes black women, especially African American women, are accused of being too overbearing, or too acting too manly, or whatever the word is. But again, I compare it to that because it's like this: if you were had to be in control of your family and your household for so many years, right, and not putting the black man down, because I do understand that there's dynamics that and there's reasons for that as well, right? But if the fact is, if you are in control of your house or your home, you had in your home for so many years, and then all of a sudden, say you meet somebody and they come into your house, there's this sort of resistance, right? This for somebody else to take over. For one reason, you're not sure if they can handle it, right? But you've been doing it so long, it's just become habit, right? I don't think it's done intentionally, right? And I'm just giving a scenario. That's not everybody's situation. Everybody's situation is different. But anyway, that's my analogy, right? You kind of compare it to that. So, you don't want to give up your leadership position. I mean, you want to, but then you don't, because, you've been doing it for so long. So, that's just kind of what I wanted to say. And again, of course, I don't give African leaders a free pass because, they are responsible for what's happening now. But again, you cannot take things out of context, right? You have to consider what has happened. And to me, that's why history is so important, okay? Because I just wanted to say one more thing, right? I know a university in my hometown who actually benefited from slavery, right? And made had economic gain from slavery, right? But I know a university that has a bigger endowment, right? Their annual endowment is more than Gambia's or Senegal's GDP, right? So you actually have institutions, and I'm quite sure that's not only in America, right? Because we talk about all of these institutions that benefited from enslavement and colonization: the banks, the insurance companies, the educational institutions, the medical institutions. I mean, the private industries, clothing industries, the banks. I mean, we can go on and on and on. So that's just the point that I'm trying to make. We don't understand how deep this thing goes and how much money was involved, right? And why there is such an incessant need to continue to control and sabotage African economies. Because believe me, there is an effort to sabotage these economies. It is mighty strange that every time it seems as if African countries are making a move to unite or to, or their company or their economies are improving because of efforts they have put in place. There's always something that happens, whether it's a new virus is introduced into the country, or just some kind of catastrophic incident, a coup takes place, and not only an African coup, but a coup that's backed by some European outside force, right? So let me end it with that, right? But I just want us to understand a little bit more about what we as African people are up against and what our leaders are up against, right? So I am Marie Ya Jouf, the Real Africanist, and I talk and teach about African history, African studies, and current African affairs. You can catch me here at the Real Africanist, or you can go to my blog at therealafricanist.com. And please, if you have gotten some value out of this video and the other videos that I've put up so far, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. Also hit the notification button so you can get the next video when I put it up. So I thank you all for listening. Have a good day, and remember to fight the power. When you are learning about Africa, always go deeper. And remember, there's always more than one side to the story. Peace.